Good afternoon, and thank you for tuning into another episode of The Launchpad. We're on episode 13 now, and I am joined today with Drew and Ian, two of the very, very sharp minds in the dynasty industry, community, whatever you want to call it. Last week, I had Josh Larkey and Alex Caruso on, and we talked about some overhyped and underhyped players. I would definitely recommend checking that out if you haven't already. But today, we are talking strictly dynasty, and we're going to talk about some polarizing players out there right now. Some guys might not be sure how to get a read on, and what I'm hoping is that Drew and Ian might have some differing takes here, so we can really dive into this a little bit. But before we dive in, I want to go through some introductions quickly. So Drew, you and I have known each other on Twitter for a little while now. This is the first time that we finally connected on a show, but why don't you go ahead and let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter, plug your Patreon and everything that you're working on right now.
Sure. I'm on Twitter at DFBeanCounter, and Patreon is patreon.com/bulletproofff. And then, podcast Bulletproof Fantasy Football, YouTube Bulletproof Fantasy Football. That's it.
Love it. And then we got Ian on here as well. And anybody that's seen this show before knows that the kind of purpose of this show is to bring on two people that have similar, I don't want to say similar takes, but similar attitudes, processes, whatever it may be. And what I really like about Drew and Ian both is that they aren't afraid to just put their content out there, put their takes out there, even if it's a little bit against the grain. And I think that's what we need more of in this industry. So many people just kind of, subscribe to the hive mind and are afraid to push against that. So Ian, absolutely thrilled to have you on today. I know you're over at DFF. Do you have anything that you're working on right now that you want to plug? And then let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter as well.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. You can follow me on Twitter at DynastyIM. I do write articles for DFF. I got some good ones out there, and then I'm getting ready to release a bunch of stuff, including access to my databases, some prospect sheets I have, and a few other things. So I guess stay tuned for that.
Awesome. Well, definitely check out Ian on Twitter if you haven't already. You can find him. He's tagged in the Periscope link, so you can see it right there. But what I like about Dynasty is that, it's really tough to have a consensus take, because you're projecting so far into the future that it's a lot different than redraft, where everyone kind of has the same takes when it comes to redraft. With Dynasty, it is so much different, and we are going to jump into a bunch of guys right now that I think are very polarizing and that you might agree with the takes, might not, but that's what makes Dynasty so much fun. So let's start off with Miami Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, who got off to, he showed some flashes last year, but a lot of people are saying that he's a complete bust at this point. Some people are saying that he's going to break out. He's got the draft capital. He had a great college career. So, Drew, let's start with you on this one. How do you feel about Tua Tagovailoa? What is the move with him in dynasty football right now?
I think you have to buy Tua Tagovailoa. I do like prospect grades, and Bulletproof is the highest grade that I give to quarterbacks. Tua got that grade. There's 17, 18 quarterbacks in the last 20 years or so that get that grade. It's pretty rare. So the fact he did is a very good sign. The hit rate on top 12 hits within their career is, I believe, 13 out of 16 from 2004 to 2018. They're quarterbacks drafted in that range. So it's very, very high. When you look at Tua's rookie season, it is definitely not as bad as people made it out to be. He was a normal rookie quarterback. He struggled, but all rookie quarterbacks struggled. One of my biggest pet peeves is that people don't grade rookies on a curve. You need to grade rookies on a rookie curve. Compare rookie seasons to rookie seasons. Unfortunately for Tua, he happened to come out with Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, who smashed. They were both basically record-setting quarterbacks. Tua was not. Tua was just normal. So it made him look really bad. And then the Dolphins did that weird thing where they kept pulling him, and I think people got spooked. But every time they pulled him after the game, they're like, hey, what do you who's the starter next game? They're like, Tua, of course, it's Tua. There was never a hesitation oh, we're not going back to Tua. They were just trying to win some games. And to be honest, I'd probably do the same thing if I was trying to win some games. You probably don't want a rookie quarterback in there in the fourth quarter when he doesn't really know what he's doing yet. So
yeah,
I'm fine with it. I'm buying Tua. His accuracy rating was 7.9 on playerprofiler.com. That was number 2 in the NFL. So that's not even grading on a rookie curve. That's grading on a entire world curve. He was the second most accurate quarterback in the world last year. So just draft Tua.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. And I think that the way that Miami handled that quarterback situation really scared off a lot of people last year. But Ian, what do you have to say about Tua? How are you feeling about his outlook going forward?
Yeah, at the end of the season, it was hard to get a gauge on Tua because as good of a prospect as I thought he was, he didn't have as good of a rookie season as probably most, and including me, thought he would. But then I like to use Keep Trade Cut as kind of like a market analyzer in Dynasty, kind of see where people are at. And after the season, he was as low as quarterback 20, which for a rookie quarterback who was a good prospect, who wasn't even as bad as some of the other people you see in quarterback 20, which one we'll get to later, like Daniel Jones is in that range. A bunch of guys who aren't quite as good as Tua, and especially after a rookie season where he was injured coming in with a hip injury and he didn't have a lot of weapons. This season, they added Will Fuller and John Ross. Jalen Waddle to the mix. So there should be a lot of extra weapons to get to above where he was at quarterback 20. But I looked recently and he was up to quarterback 13, which is, I think, a lot more appropriate for who he is as a prospect and who he was as a rookie quarterback, which wasn't even as bad as people are overreacting to.
Yeah, I agree with you on everything that you said there. And we see that Steffi Smalls is in the chat right now saying that she is out on Tua. Let's see how you feel about Daniel Jones, because that's who we've got next on the docket. And I want to talk a little bit about him. For anyone that's just tuning in, we're not talking about 2021. We are talking about long-term prospecting and going forward and what we should expect with Daniel Jones. So Ian, let's start with you here. How do you feel about Daniel Jones? Is he a buy? Is he a sell? Is he somebody that you're just holding on to? What is the move with Daniel Jones in Dynasty right now?
I think a popular thing to do in Dynasty is find a late round quarterback who's still a starter in the NFL and call it value, which is something I see a lot of people do with Daniel Jones. But the thing is, Daniel Jones hasn't been good and actually has to be good for there to be some sort of value on that. I see a lot of people who like to use the Josh Allen comparison because Josh Allen got Stephon Diggs last year and set the league afire, and Daniel Jones got Kenny Golladay. But I think the problem with that is that Stephon Diggs is not Kenny Golladay. He's a lot better than Kenny Golladay. Stephon Diggs has never once in his career posted below a 20% target share, which in fact his rookie season, Stephon Diggs' rookie season, which was a while ago, he posted a 22.75% target, which is higher than Galladay's highest target share. And then you look at everything else across their career, Stephon Diggs has a higher target share, receiving yards per pass attempts, and the only thing really holding him back was a low value pass attack in Minnesota. He's outproduced him in PPR. Everything except for TD percentage, where Golladay has more than a higher TD percentage than Stephon Diggs. But Kenny Golladay is going from Matthew Stafford to Daniel Jones, which isn't exactly something that makes you think that TD percentage, which isn't sticky already, will stay. And that's the only thing that's kind of kept Kenny Golladay in that elite wide receiver range, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'm sure Drew could go in on Kenny Golladay. I know you caused some heat a little while back calling Kenny Golladay a fake alpha. So we won't get into that. Let's focus on Daniel Jones right now. What is your plan with Daniel Jones in Dynasty right now, Drew?
Daniel Jones has been a sell since the moment he was drafted. He was one of the worst quarterbacks taken in the first round, I think, in my database. Not the worst, but he's up there among the worst, which is alarmingly bad considering he went 6th overall to the Giants. His rookie year was okay. It was fine. His second year was absolutely atrocious, and I would expect more of that. So I'm selling Daniel Jones pretty comfortably. I want nothing to do with him. I would be actually more shocked if he was a starter next year than if he was on a bench somewhere.
Now, the one thing I want to point out about Daniel Jones is that his splits with and without Saquon are drastically different. He's averaging almost 50% more yards per game when Saquon is on the field. So, it seems like that's kind of what they wanted to build the foundation around in New York was Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley, and injuries and other things have really kept them from being able to do that. I think they've only played together for a total of 11 games. So we know that right now injuries are starting to become a concern with Saquon Barkley. And I want to talk about him a little bit, Drew. So what's the move with Saquon Barkley? I mean, he's still young. He is a generational talent. Everybody loves to slap that label on him. The dude's a freak of nature. We saw what he did his rookie year, but since then he's kind of struggled to get up to speed. Injuries have held him back. So what are you doing with Saquon Barkley?
I'm buying Saquon Barkley. He's the kind of player that you just buy into eternity. Like, I don't care what his price is. I'm buying Saquon Barkley. Every time that he touches the football field, he's the best player on the field, period. If you have a chance to buy a player like that, even if he is injured off and on for the next 5 years, let's say, the games that he plays, he's going to help you win your fantasy league. So just draft him or trade for him, acquire him, get him onto your team, and let him win you the championship, because like nobody else other than like Christian McCaffrey has his type of ceiling. That's it. It's him and McCaffrey. Those are the only guys. And you ain't getting McCaffrey for cheap. So go get Saquon.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to me how much people overreacted over this. Like we said, he's still young, and age is the biggest indicator to bounce back from an injury. So I don't think that injury concerns are really something worth freaking out about. I mean, seeing Dalvin Cook going ahead of Saquon Barkley, that's something that I don't even agree with. I think Saquon Barkley should be the number 2 running back in Dynasty behind only Christian McCaffrey. But Ian, I want to hear what you've got to say. Are you buying Saquon as well, or are you getting a little bit scared off by these injuries?
I'm all over Saquon Barkley. New metric that I've kind of been working with is non-quarterback rushing yard market share, which I would talk a lot more about if I had more time. But Saquon Barkley dominates the backfield. That metric is essentially what percentage of the rushing yards do you have that if you take out the quarterback. And he dominates. He puts an 80.1% and 88.3% in his first 2 seasons. But the big thing about Saquon is I think that he's such an underappreciated pass catcher. His first season, 20.8% target share, and in the second, he had over a 14. So what I did was I looked up all the.
What did you say it was? What was it? His rookie year? What was that target share?
20.8%.
For a running back, that's insane.
Just if I can interject for one moment. That might be Kenny Galladay's career high. I'm not sure. It's right in that ballpark.
So Saquon is more of an alpha receiver than Kenny Galladay is what you're saying. But that is unbelievable. I mean, that's Christian McCaffrey-esque, 20% target share for a running back. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that just blew my mind. Go ahead, Ian. Keep going.
So then after that, I looked up all the running backs that have put up a 12% target share in each of their first 2 seasons. And I got 12 names that include Christian McCaffrey, Reggie Bush, Matt Forte, Chris Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, Maurice Jones-Drew, Ray Rice, Alvin Kamara. And the crazier part about all this is only 2 of these guys actually eclipsed an 80% rushing yard market share. And Saquon did it in both seasons. He's one of the best prospects of all time. He's had one of the best starts to a career, both in the backfield as a rusher and a receiver. And you don't even have to pay running back even 3 price to get him. I mean, I'm all over that.
Yeah, I mean, this is one that I had a feeling we were all going to agree on. And I just wanted to talk about Saquon because I think the overcorrection and the scares about his injuries have just been completely overblown at this point. The fact that I know we're talking dynasty, but the fact that you could get him in the mid-second round in redraft leagues just a couple weeks ago and in best ball leagues is just mind-boggling to me. I mean, like we know who this guy is. He is up there in the same tier as Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook with a higher ceiling than anybody else on the field. So I am with you guys on this. I think that we are all buying Saquon Barkley easily here. But I want to switch to another pretty polarizing running back. And I think, he started off not getting a lot of touches early in his career. And then over the last 2 seasons, he has seen one of the biggest workloads that we have seen in NFL history. Now he's 27 years old, new offensive coordinator. People are worrying that his legs are going to fall out from underneath him. Obviously, I am talking about Derrick Henry. Ian, why don't you start us off and talk a little bit about Derrick Henry? What is it that you're hoping to do with Derrick Henry in your dynasty leagues?
I think the thing with Henry is that you need a little more game theory with him, because if you have Derrick Henry, you're just riding until the wheels fall off. If you want to sell him, you're not going to get the value you want in return. If you're trying to buy him, it's going to be too steep of a price that you want to pay for, because there's all this, nervous over he's a 27-year-old, primarily running or rushing running back who gets a very low target share on a low passing volume offense. He's already 27, like I said. So if you have him, he could be a stud for you, not running back 1, 2. His ceiling's pretty capped because of that target share, but he's still a very good rusher. The thing is, if you buy him or you're selling him, that's probably not an option because you're kind of stuck with him riding until the wheels fall off. There's no getting out of Derrick Henry or getting to Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I feel like that's the stance that a lot of people are taking right now. I want to get Drew's take on this, and then I'll talk a little bit on Derrick Henry after that. But Drew, what are you doing with Derrick Henry?
It's really league specific. Like if I can get a good deal for him, I'd happily pull the trigger. if I can't get anywhere near market value, I'm just going to ride it out and see where it goes. He's probably still going to be good this year, I would think. We have no evidence of a decline, I guess is maybe the way to put it. The only evidence is that he's 27, but there's no fall off in play last year or anything like that. So it's probably pretty safe to say he's going to have at least a good season, maybe not like to the level that he's had the last couple of years where he's top 5 running back, but he should be a running back 1 at the very least. So yeah, it's really league specific. If I can get out of him for say like a DeAndre Swift or something like that, I would easily do it. If I can't, then I'm just going to hold on and hopefully win another championship or 2 with him as one of my running backs, and he'll retire on my bench.
Yeah, and I think one of the cases that I've heard, and when you look at the carries that he's had what is it? It's like almost 800 carries over the last 2 years when you're looking at postseason. I mean, just an absolutely insane amount of volume that he's had to deal with. But when you look at the first few years, we know he was in that frustrating timeshare with DeMarco Murray, and then Dion Lewis was there. So 110 carries in his rookie year, 176 the season after that, 215 after that. And then it was 2019 that we really saw him become the workhorse that we've seen over the last couple of years. So is that something that you're factoring into your evaluation at all, that he might have a little, even though he's had this heavy workload over the last 2 years, that he still isn't really your normal 27-year-old running back because of that early season light workload?
For me, no, it's not really something I'm considering. I've never really seen anything like conclusive on that kind of thing. Like, it feels like if you're saying, okay, at age 27, running backs normally fall off. Okay, sure. But you could also say, well, that, 1,000 carries, that's when running backs usually fall off. It's like, well, was it because they're 27 or is because they had 1,000 carries? Like, most guys will get to that mark around the same age because they all start around the same age, right? So it's really hard to determine if it's the age or the number of carries or the number of seasons or what have you. So for me, it's just like, what does my projection this year tell me? Well, my projection this year tells me he's probably still going to be the same Derrick Henry that we've always seen. Maybe they don't score as many touchdowns. Maybe they don't, move the ball as well as they have in the past. Maybe they pass more this year and run less. Who knows? But he's still probably going to be the focal point of the rushing attack at the very least. And from my perspective, that's what I'm penciling him in for right now. I with a running back at this point in his career, I'm only looking at the next year. Anything after that is kind of gravy for me. If he gets 2 or 3 more years, great. I'm probably not going to sell him after this year because the value, like, there's the production dip, right, which usually happens around now, and then there's the value dip, which usually happens like last year, the year before. That's why we were saying you need to sell Derrick Henry after his breakout year, because even if he's great, his value is going down in the dynasty. So just get out while you can and buy him again in 2 years. So for me, the sell window is already kind of gone. I realize his dynasty value is still somewhere around like RB 13 or so. So it's not that low yet, but it's certainly not where it was. And it's certainly not where his redraft ADP is. So anyways, I don't really have a concrete take one way or the other around number of carries or age or anything of that variety. At this point, I'm just looking at what's he going to do this year, and based on what I can get for him, is that worth it?
Yeah. And I mean, if there's anybody in the league right now that is going to just defy all of the analytics and the odds and the everything stacked against him, it's Derrick Henry. I mean, we've seen this guy just have a monumental workload in 2.5 years. It was kind of halfway through 2018 that he became the player that he is right now, and just doesn't get injured. Like, he's getting the ball almost 30 times a game and just still is rock solid week in and week out. I mean, you don't even see him on the injury report. Like, this guy is just the definition of being built different. Now, Drew, I know you said that, one guy that you'd be interested in trading him for would be a DeAndre Swift. So I want to talk about him because I think the dynasty community is pretty bullish on him, but then you also have the people that worry about the Lions and where they're at right now with Jared Goff under center and a new head coach and just the history of Lions running backs. So, Ian, I'll start with you on this one, but what's the move with DeAndre Swift? How are we feeling about him?
Well, he might quite possibly be the most undervalued asset in all of Dynasty, which I want to bring up the point you said first about him being on the Lions. It's kind of perceived as a bad situation, but the thing is with DeAndre Swift, it really shouldn't be. He's an elite pass catcher. Swift was 6th in target share among those with 100+ carries as a rookie. He has legitimate 100 target upside on a team that's going to most likely be down a lot, like you said, which means they'll be throwing more. And when you have an elite pass catcher like Deandre Swift, who also the second part of it is that he's not even that bad of a rusher. He had just under 50% of the rushing yard market share minus the quarterback. And he was still one of the best rookies we've seen. He was already a good prospect. And everything that we're looking at points to, like, the closest comps I get are like LaShawn McCoy, Maurice Jones-Drew, and Javid Best, too. A former Lion who probably would have been a top 5 running back if it wasn't for the concussions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, Javid Best was absolutely electric. He was a guy, this was before I was playing Dynasty football, but just like in my redraft leagues, we saw him just take the league by storm in the preseason, and then injuries are what held him back. But really, I mean, I don't want to be a helmet scout, but that's kind of been the story of every running back that has come through Detroit since Barry Sanders. People are sitting here saying that Barry Sanders left some curse in the locker room for any running backs that come through. I'm not going to buy into that, but I mean, it is kind of concerning that just the way we've seen guys break down over there. Now, Drew, I just want to hear what you've got to say about, I know you're buying DeAndre Swift, but go ahead and tell us why you're buying DeAndre Swift.
So again, DeAndre Swift, like, similar to Tua Tagovailoa, DeAndre Swift hit my bulletproof tier. For running backs, I only have about 25, I think, in the last 20 years. So again, it's pretty rare. It's only usually 1 or 2 guys a year. DeAndre Swift hit it. Last year was actually pretty special. There was a few guys that hit it. But anyway, DeAndre Swift hit it, but he didn't just hit it. He also hit my receiving thresholds, which are absurdly high and really, really difficult to hit. Of the players that did qualify for bulletproof and hit my receiving thresholds, I have LaShawn McCoy, Matt Forte, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Noshawn Marino, Reggie Bush, Joe Mixon, Steve Slayton, Giovanni Bernard, Rashad Mendenhall, and DeAndre Swift. Every single player on that list, except for Giovanni Bernard and Rashad Mendenhall, have top 12 finishes. Half of those guys have top 5 finishes. The ones recently are, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, and Saquon Barkley. So, and then when you look at his rookie year receiving work and production, like, that's where he should be. That's where he will get to eventually if this whole thing works. I don't know. We'll see. But like that's what I'm expecting of him. Like, why wouldn't he be in that category when he was that in as a prospect, and then he was that as a rookie? The next logical step is that he would be that again in his second year. So for me, it's just like bet on the talent. And then beyond that, I have a really hard time believing that anybody can predict with any type of confidence who is and is not the worst offenses in football. I have to imagine that if you're betting on the worst offenses in football, I'm not going to put Jared Goff on that list, because Jared Goff may not be an elite quarterback. In fact, he's not an elite quarterback. He's nowhere near that. But he's also not the worst quarterback in the NFL. There are much worse quarterbacks in the NFL than Jared Goff. And TJ Hawkinson's on that team too. So we have Jared Goff, not a bad quarterback, or not a good quarterback, a mediocre quarterback. And we have TJ Hawkinson, who is a good tight end. And we have DeAndre Swift, who is a good running back. So we have 3 players on the offense that are pretty good and an elite offensive line. So how can this possibly be the worst offense in football? I just can't see how that goes together. Like, this isn't. What's that?
I'm just saying, I am starting to warm up to this Lions offense just a little bit, just because this offensive line that they're putting together, that's something that in the fantasy community, we rarely talk about the offensive line. It's something that, we might mention, a PFF grade, and that's about it, and don't really dive too deeply into it. But once the offensive line starts clicking, it gets everything else going. And that's where this Detroit Lions team, when they decided to just completely gut the roster, they built it from the offensive line. So we could see this team really outperform their offseason predictions.
Honestly, and when you look at like quarterback performance, and you look at how do you put it, like clean pocket performance from quarterbacks, it is substantially higher than when they're rushed. So if we're telling like if Jared Goff maybe isn't that good, but he gets a clean pocket more than basically anyone else, he could still be a pretty good quarterback in the NFL. If he's on the run, yeah, he's not going to be very good. But the offensive line tells us he's probably not going to be on the run that often. And I mean, I don't mean on the run, like literally, he's not going to run anywhere, but like running for his life is what I mean.
Right. So Ian, let me ask you, I mean, is this something where you can see Jared Goff supporting, obviously I don't think anybody is expecting the Lions to be a top 5 offense. That just probably is nowhere near their range of outcomes. But can you see this team being, more of a middle of the pack offense and not the absolute bottom tier trash offense that everybody's saying that they're going to be?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're not going to be a playoff team or a good team by any stretch of the imagination, but they have weapons. Like you said, they built from the offensive line, and they still have Jared Goff, who has had good seasons. They have DeAndre Swift, who's really good, and they have TJ Hawkinson. So they have guys, and they're going to be a lot better than what people are expecting them to be. Which, a little off topic, but I've been getting quite a few Goff shares this season as like a quarterback 3, quarterback 4 on my Superflex rosters because he's being treated like he's Daniel Jones.
Got to make one more little Daniel Jones jab in there. Well, let's go ahead. We've got one more running back that I want to talk about. And, this guy, I didn't really think he was going to be that polarizing. It seemed like when the season ended, everybody was trying to buy as much Antonio Gibson as possible. But now, after 1 week of preseason, it looks like J.D. McKissic, his role hasn't changed. And it looks like he is going to stay the third down back. Picked up 110 targets last year. Now, Antonio Gibson wasn't on a lot of people's radars heading into his rookie season, but he completely outperformed what people expected. And now, heading into year 2, we were expecting this Christian McCaffrey size workload. And I personally don't think that we're going to see that as long as J.D. McKissic and Peyton Barber are there. So from a dynasty standpoint, I'll start with you on this one, Drew. What are we doing with Antonio Gibson?
I think you have to sell. Like I like Antonio Gibson as much as anybody else last year coming out. His issue was sample size, not performance. Like if you look at his really small sample performance, it was pretty good last year as a running back, as a prospect. And then last year he was pretty good running back in the NFL. But the problem was we don't really know that much about him, which adds a layer of risk. We have a third down back that returned. It's not like they got rid of him. If he had left, then we'd be like, okay, well, yeah, maybe Gibson just takes over that role and we have this bona fide 3-down back that's going to break fantasy. But McKissic didn't leave. So we're to project a player that already has a role out of a role is really hard for me. I have a hard time getting on board with that. So yeah, I don't know. Gibson could potentially get that role, but I can't see it.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And Ian, why don't you talk a little bit about Antonio Gibson? What are you doing with him this offseason?
If I had a share, I'd definitely be selling. Just looking through keep trade cut, he's running back 6, which was pretty crazy. I like Gibson, but that's pretty steep, especially for a guy like Drew said that we don't have too big of a sample size on to project who he's going to be. He clearly wasn't not that he wasn't a good prospect, but he played wide receiver and he had such small sample size that he fell to the 3rd round, and he outperformed what his prospects status said he should. But the things that I see are like he had 14.4 PPR last year. He finished RB17, and he's going into his 2nd season. That was also helped by a 5.14% TD percentage, which ranked 6th among all running backs, the 44 running backs with 100-plus carries. So if we expect a little bit of regression, his TDs will come down. Like you said, J.D. McKissic is still there, which I've seen a lot of Antonio Gibson's a pass-catching back, but his 8.34% was not exactly great. It was good, but it's not RB6 pass catcher great. And then when I run his range of outcomes, I get names like Philip Lindsay, Trey Mason, Zach Stacy, Eddie Lacy, Joseph Dye, and DeMarco Murray. The problem with seeing DeMarco Murray as a ceiling is that we knew coming into the league, DeMarco Murray could be a bell cow, and that's what I profiled him as. So RB6 is such a steep price to pay for such an unknown that I don't have too much confidence in.
Yeah, and it seems like everybody just wanted Antonio Gibson to be a thing. He was kind of that sleeper coming into his rookie season, and then some people got so excited that they called him as a sleeper and he hit, that then they just started running wild with it and saying that he was going to be the next Christian McCaffrey. And I don't think that's possible. I don't think that this offense, especially with the defense that they have, I just don't think that they're ever going to be in a position where they're going to be feeding a running back like that. And if they do, it's going to be J.D. McKissic taking it through the air. So I love Antonio Gibson's skill set. He's a ton of fun to watch. He had a great rookie season, but I agree that he's a sell. Drew, before we move over onto wide receivers, is there anything that you wanted to mention about Antonio Gibson?
No, I have basically the exact same thoughts. Like, I just think he's so risky. Regardless of his like market price, when I look at his profile, I'm just like, well, there's a lot of risk. No matter what his price is, there's just a lot of risk there. And then when you tack on running back 6, it's like, well, we need him to be. He cannot possibly be. He has to be what we think he is. And I have no confidence saying that he is going to be a top 6 running back at any point in his career. I think he could be. I think that's, he has that potential. He was a wide receiver, so he can catch passes, but we haven't seen it in the NFL. We don't know that they're ever going to put him in that role. And until we get some kind of confirmation that's going to happen, I think RB6 is just an absurd price.
Yeah. And, I just mentioned a little bit ago that the fantasy community never really wants to talk about offensive line. Another thing they don't want to talk about is pass protection. And that's something that Antonio Gibson was terrible at last year. Meanwhile, they've got J.D. McKissic over there, who's a phenomenal pass catcher. And I think that's why you see him getting yanked off the field and passing downs. It's not that he can't catch the ball out of the backfield. It's not that he can't run routes. We know he can. He was a wide receiver in college, and that's why everybody is expecting this. But what the coaches are grading these guys on when it comes to who's taking the passing down work is who's better at pass protection. And that is unequivocally J.D. McKissic. He's the better pass blocker. So until Antonio Gibson can really, really step up in that level, I think that he's going to continue to cede those third down touches to J.D. McKissic, and it's just going to be really, really frustrating for the next few years. But I think we covered. Yeah.
Sorry, one more thing on that topic. I've never actually looked into this until somebody brought it up this year that I think it was Deandre Swift was a bad pass blocker. And I was like, well, I've never looked at it before. So I looked up PFF pass blocking grades for all the rookies, and they were all terrible. Swift was like not the worst pass blocker. They were all absolutely atrocious. And I don't know if that's normal. Like, is this class of rookies just really bad at pass blocking, or are rookies always really bad at pass blocking? You know what I mean? Like, this is that whole like grading on a curve thing, right? Like, does it take them time to learn how to pass block in the NFL? I have no idea. So like, I'm just completely dumbfounded by that. Have you ever looked into that?
I have not, no, and I just jotted that down because as soon as we get off that show, that's going to be my project for the rest of the afternoon is looking into that. But yeah, now that you're mentioning it, I feel like I've seen a few guys that came in as rookies that just immediately had it. But yeah, last year's class really, really didn't at all. And funny enough, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who was, like you said, terrible at pass protection, was still the best on the team until they brought in Le'Veon Bell, who is also terrible at pass protection. But that's how low the bar was in Kansas City last year. And that's why they went out and brought in Le'Veon Bell. They didn't bring him in because Clyde Edwards-Helaire couldn't handle the rushes and the passing work. They brought him in because he couldn't pass block. But I'm going to look into that and see historically how other rookies have done in pass pro. It's a good talking point. I wish I could talk to that a little bit more, Drew. But
yeah,
I think
we'll get into my database so I can compare year over year, because I don't know, maybe they all just suck every year. Maybe there's like one guy that's good once in a while, but for the most part, everybody just comes in with like a 40 pass blocking grade from PFF, and then we see them progress throughout their career. I don't know.
And it seems like right now, I don't want to say the playing field has been leveled, but even the casual fantasy football fans, there's just so much data out there nowadays and aggregated websites that people are able to draft pretty sharply, even if they're just plugging in a week before the season because of all of the grunt work we're doing in the offseason to make it easier for them. But I think that's going to kind of be the next thing that we're going to see developing when it comes to looking at how players are going to be, looking at how they are in pass protection, and looking at how their offensive line works. It seems like not a lot of people are really factoring that into their projections. And I think that's going to be something that we'll see somebody step forward with the next couple of years. It's really going to change the game. But we've talked about quarterbacks. We had Tua and Daniel Jones. We talked about running backs with Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Antonio Gibson, and Deandre Swift. So now I want to talk about some wide receivers. And I'm going to start off with probably the most polarizing of all of the wide receivers. This guy was the consensus wide receiver one just 2 years ago. And now he is kryptonite. Nobody wants to touch this guy. Michael Thomas, he just went under the knife, and we don't know if he's going to play at all this season. We see these cryptic tweets on Twitter. It seems like he is kind of turning into one of those diva wide receivers that just always have drama surrounding them. And just not reading into that, it's tough to ignore. But Ian, we'll start with you. What are we supposed to do with Michael Thomas? And I'm not saying this rhetorically. Like, I genuinely, what should I do with Michael Thomas? Because I have no idea.
Michael Thomas at the worst is someone you should be holding and maybe even buying. I think there's no reason to sell. This is the lowest we've seen Michael Thomas's value, and it's way less than what his talent says, and I'm always buying talent. Wide receiver 30 is what I see him about, and that's pretty outrageous for a guy who was literally the consensus wide receiver one last year. And it's all because of bad situation. It's not because of talent or anything else. If I want to talk about like talent, what I've seen is some people say, well, Drew Brees is gone, he can't be force fed. Well, if we look at Drew Brees in the lineup and Drew Brees not when Michael Thomas plays, without Drew Brees, he has a 10-game sample size, so that's with Taysom Hill and Teddy Bridgewater, and he averaged 9.6 targets per game, good for 18.7 PPR. With Drew Brees, he got 60 games, 9.4 targets per game, and 18.5 PPR. So there's really not, and 10 games is a healthy sample size. And it's not really that much of a difference. It actually shows that without Drew Brees, he was slightly better, which isn't true, but it shows that there's no reason to overreact to Drew Brees being gone. So now we look at, okay, there's an injury, and that's why he's getting graded down. When we look at the talent, his target shares of averages a 26.8% target share. That's what he averages over his career. Last 3 years of healthy seasons, 31.9%, 28.4%, and 27.8%. Like, those are just insane numbers. And to get that at wide receiver 30, injury or not, just there's no reason to sell.
Drew, what do you have to add about Michael Thomas? Are you buying as well?
At wide receiver 30, I'm buying, yes. I had him at wide receiver 5, I think, in my rankings, or thereabouts, prior to this surgery news. I didn't care that Drew Brees wasn't there anymore. It didn't matter to me in the slightest. He's one of the best wide receivers in football. He's going to get his 28%-ish target share year over year. It doesn't matter who the quarterback is. He's going to convert a lot of those passes into catches. There's no concern for me with production. That was never a concern. What was a concern was this injury that I don't really know anything about because I'm not a doctor. But I had asked Dr. Jesse Morse, is that his name?
Yes. Yep.
On Twitter, he had a post about it. I was like, well, like, are we just talking about like he's not going to be ready for the beginning of the season and we're panicking? Or are we talking about this is going to affect him for the rest of his career? And he's like, I think he may never be the same. And then I was like, okay, well, now I'm panicking because if he's never the same, then maybe we're not talking about his production is solid and we don't really care anymore. But he's obviously not Michael Thomas's doctor, so he doesn't have all of the information that Michael Thomas's doctor would. He's making an educated guess based on what he knows about the situation. So I moved him down my rankings a fair bit. I'm still way ahead of wide receiver 30 because that's absurd for a player that could win your fantasy league. Mm-hmm. So I'm buying Michael Thomas at that price range.
Yeah, I mean, wide receiver 30, that's just, the definition of an overcorrection, because I think realistically, you saw the cryptic tweet that came out a couple of weeks ago, and then following that cryptic tweet, somebody responded to it, and they said, I think that what happened is that he was injured last year, and the team forced him to play through the injury because it was Drew Brees' final season, and that made the injury worse. And of course, Michael Thomas liked that, and somebody screenshotted it. And it seems like, the problem here isn't really so much injuries as it is just tension between the team and Michael Thomas. So I'm hoping that he somehow gets traded and can just completely revitalize his career on a different team. So I'm buying as well. We got Dynasty Joker in the chat, though, that just dropped this, and I'm wondering what you guys think about this one. He just sold Michael Thomas for a first and a second. Let's just assume that these are 2022 seconds. Ian, is that a deal that you would make, or do you think that he's selling a little bit too low on MT there?
I'm assuming we're talking Superflex here, because if we are talking Superflex, a first and a second for Michael Thomas is maybe where I'd sell him, but again, like Drew said, we're looking at someone that the biggest thing is not production. And so it's something that it's really hard for us to figure out what it is. And the upside for Michael Thomas is winning you a league. If you're in a position where you should be collecting picks, I mean, yeah, definitely a first and a second is something that could get the job done. But if you're trying to win, the upside in Michael Thomas is a lot higher than the first and second rounds.
What do you think, Drew? If you've got Michael Thomas, would you think about selling him for this, or are you hoping for a little bit more?
It would really depend. If that's an early first, I'd be into it without question. If that's a late first, then I'm probably not that into it. If it's a mid first, then I'm on the fence. I'd probably still hold Michael Thomas if it's a mid first. It's hard to say for sure. Obviously, it depends on where your team's at and so on and so forth. But in my opinion, like I said earlier, I do this grading system where I tell my patrons these are the bulletproof players, and those players have pretty good hit rates. So I feel like we're kind of printing money in the first round. I really try not to sell first round picks because we're almost always guaranteed to get a bulletproof player in the first round. So it's hard for me to say, yeah, trade that first when I know it's probably going to be somebody that I really like next year.
That's a good point.
My whole thing is basically keep your first.
Yeah.
If I could swap that out, like instead of selling for a first and second, I'd sell for a first and second value. If I could get rid of like a Denzel Mims as the second round pick kind of thing or something like that,
right?
I'd be super into that.
But you trust your draft process enough that you're trying to hold on to those picks. We've
wait.
also got another comment in here where G-Ray is saying that Stephania Bell said that the ankle will not be an issue when he comes back healthy, that this surgery will fix everything 100%. And that's what this is. That's why it's polarizing. We got Jesse out here saying that it's not going to be the same. Stephania Bell saying that it is going to be the same. And then I'm sure that there are 100 medical analysts that are somewhere in between each of those takes as well. Let's move on to the next player, though. And this is a guy that I have been beating the drum for all season, just 25 years old. I think he's an absolute stud. I don't know how either of you have graded him, but Corlyn Sutton is just one of my favorite players in the league. And yesterday I got invited to Broncos camp and I got to see him playing in person. And he has a gigantic knee brace on. He didn't look fast. He wasn't cutting on his routes like he normally would. And then there was a pass that went right above his head that he didn't even attempt to jump for. So I'm getting a little worried right now that this knee injury is still lingering. So Drew, let's start with you. What are you doing with Cortland Sutton? Are you just holding him right now, or are you trying to buy or sell?
I'm trying to buy. Sure, the knee may not be perfect right now. Probably won't be to start the season, but at some point it's going to be, and he's still only 25, 26, if I recall correctly.
25, yep.
So it's not like we're at the end of his career where it's like, I don't know if he'll be back next year. Like, he's going to be back next year. He is an alpha profile. He has, I believe he had a 26% target share in his second year, which is higher than most players ever get at any point in their careers, roughly 6 percentage points higher than Kenny Golladay has ever seen at any point in his career specifically, because Kenny Golladay is a fake alpha and Cortland Sutton's a real one. So, like, Cortland Sutton is the type of player that could actually, like, along the lines of Michael Thomas, where we're looking at this 28% target share and saying, well, he could come back and win your league. Cortland Sutton could be that guy. We don't have as much confidence in that as we do with Michael Thomas, because Michael Thomas has done it several times. Cortland Sutton has never done it. So we'll have to wait and see if he ever gets to that point, but he has that in his range of outcomes. And that's a range of outcomes that I am absolutely interested in buying in Dynasty. If it doesn't happen this year, I'm into it for next year.
Yeah, I love everything you said there, and people get so excited about Jerry Jeudy, and I love Jerry Jeudy. He's a fantastic route runner, but I think so much of what he does is going to require an accurate quarterback that can hit him in stride and get down on these timing patterns, where we saw Corlyn Sutton put up 1,100 yards with absolutely garbage quarterback play, and I don't know the exact number, but I'd guess that somewhere around 50% of those yards came on ridiculously poorly thrown balls that he was able to pull out of thin air and make these acrobatic contested catches. And that's the type of player that Cortland Sutton is. He really is an alpha in this league. And so I'm trying to buy him as well. Ian, what are you doing with Cortland Sutton? Are we in agreement on this, or are you getting a little concerned?
I'm also buying Corlyn Sutton. He has the injury discount and then what I like to call the Jerry Jeudy discount, where you can get him for a lot cheaper than he really should be. We're looking at Sutton's range of outcomes. I get players Mike Wallace, Kenny Golladay, DJ Moore, Alshon Jeffrey, DeAndre Hopkins, and Calvin Johnson. Although we'll take Calvin Johnson off that list for many reasons. But either way, these are all productive alphas, and he was a productive alpha. So what I tried to do was I looked at all the betas that had a similar target share to Jeudy in their first year, around that like 17 to 21% range. And then I tried to see what would happen if they had a productive alpha that came into the offense. So the first one I looked at was Deshaun Jackson, who commanded 18 or 19% target share with Philadelphia, and then Jeremy Maclin came into the mix. That first season, Jeremy Maclin had a higher target share, and then the rest of their time in Philadelphia, it was Jeremy Maclin and Deshaun Jackson was the clear beta. And then the next one I found was Will Fuller, who took a backseat to DeAndre Hopkins, one of Cortland Sutton's comps. And then the other one I found was Corey Coleman, who Corey Coleman may sound crazy to some people, but he had a 20.6% target share and an 18% target share his first two seasons. And then Odell Beckham came into the league or onto the Cleveland Browns. And Corey Coleman isn't even on the team anymore, which isn't what's going to happen to Jerry Jeudy. But in every instance I was finding for productive beta, which is what Jerry Jeudy is, and when an established or productive alpha came into the mix, the alpha was taking the beta the targets almost every single time. That right, and Jerry Jeudy's actually more expensive in Dynasty than Cortland Sutton is. So with all the discounts, I'm definitely buying Cortland Sutton.
Yeah, it blows my mind. I think that is one of the biggest discrepancies right now in both the dynasty and redraft community is that Jerry Jeudy is going ahead of Cortland Sutton. I say this all the time, but recency bias just plagues fantasy managers so badly. And Cortland Sutton was like everybody's favorite wide receiver heading into last year. And then we don't see him play for 1 year and people just suddenly forget how good this guy is. So I agree with both of you. I think that Cortland Sutton is a buy in any format right now. Cannot get enough of him. All right, got two more receivers that I want to cover here. And Ian, I'll start with you on this one because I already know what Drew's take is going to be, and I don't know what your take is going to be. I want to talk about DJ Moore, who, he's been pretty much a lock for 1,000 yards, but he has struggled to really hit his ceiling so far. So some people are saying to buy, some people are saying that, this is just the type of player he's going to be, and they're trying to sell. What is your stance on DJ Moore?
Yeah, so the part that you mentioned about him not hitting his ceiling has a lot to do with his touchdowns, which is something that I want to get into because he's everything aside from touchdowns. He's posted at an elite rate. He was an elite prospect. In his last two seasons, he's posted a 22.7 and a 22.9% target share, which he's one of 16 players to do that in the last 2 years. So then I looked at the players in the last 2 years who did the same thing that DJ Moore did. And he's 15th in TD percentage. And it's by a healthy margin. And last place would be Robert Woods, another person you should probably be buying. But if we look at it a little bit deeper, he did this in his second and third season. So when I looked at the players who did what he did in his second and third season, he was the 27th alpha to do that. So then when I looked at all 27 of those alphas, DJ Moore was dead last in TD percentage at 2.93. So it's showing that his ceiling is severely limited by these touchdowns, so it's like, okay, so maybe he just doesn't get touchdowns, which they aren't sticky, which you can't really predict them. So that's tough. But then when I found on FTN data where they have end zone target share, DJ Moore was second to Adam Thielen. So clearly I would say it's more of accidental that he hasn't hit his wide receiver one ceiling or even higher than that. And I mean, you're getting the discount of something that's super unpredictable in touchdowns.
That is crazy. You're saying so he was second in end zone target rate behind only Adam Thielen last year?
Yep,
that
according
is
to FTN data.
Mind-blowing. Wow. All right. Well, I'll have to talk to my friend Steffi Smalls over at FTN and have her scrub that data and make sure that it's accurate. But that's shocking to me. I didn't realize that. Drew, I know you're buying DJ Moore, but tell us why you're buying DJ Moore.
Basically exactly what Ian just said. If you look at DJ Moore from a yardage perspective, he is basically elite. Like he's been on a 1,200 yard pace each of the last 2 years, which is incredible for I think, what is he now? 24? I think he just turned 24.
Yeah, very young still.
Anyway. So like we're talking about a perennial 1,200 yard receiver at age 24, and his price does not reflect that at all. The interesting thing as well about his target or his touchdown rate is that he's had Teddy Bridgewater, a notorious non-touchdown thrower. At no point in his career has he had a high or even average touchdown rate. So it's not really a DJ Moore thing. It's not really a Robbie Anderson. It's not a Carolina Panthers thing last year that they didn't score a lot of touchdowns through the air. It's a Teddy Bridgewater thing. And then the year before that, we had Kyle Allen, who is decidedly not very good. So I just don't know why anybody would have expected him to ever catch touchdowns. And I think the pushback to that is, well, now he has Sam Darnold, who I also think is not very good. So maybe he's not going to score touchdowns this year either. But at some point, he is going to get a quarterback that can throw some touchdowns. And variance happens. Like we could see Sam Darnold throw for a 6 or 7% touchdown rate this year. It could happen. Anything can happen. Touchdowns are not overly sticky, as Ian said. So just embrace the variance. Be happy that you're buying him at his absolute floor as a perennial 1,200 yard receiver. Who's probably going to be a wide receiver too at the very worst, and hope that he hits on the high variance on the touchdowns, and he'll be probably top 5.
Yeah, and so many people are quick to discount DJ Moore because of Sam Darnold. I just want to say that if Sam Darnold doesn't do well this year, I don't think he's going to be the long-term option. I think this is kind of his last opportunity. There's going to be a lot of great free agents that are hitting the market next offseason. There's going to be some, it's a pretty weak draft class as far as quarterbacks go. But, Russell Wilson has talked about wanting out of Seattle. We know that Aaron Rodgers has gone out of Green Bay. And while everybody always props up Denver as this, fantastic landing spot for a quarterback, look what Carolina's got going on right now. They got DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, Terrace Marshall Jr., Christian McCaffrey. That is also going to be a spot that a lot of guys are going to want to go. And with Jameis Winston hitting the free agent market, Aaron Rodgers, and some of these other guys, I think that they can see that quarterback upgrade last year. So this might be your last chance to buy DJ Moore. I'm not quite as bullish on him as you are, Drew, but I agree with all the points that you made, and I do think that he is a buy at this point. The last guy I want to talk about is Tyler Lockett.
Can I add something real quick?
Of course. Yeah, go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, when I came on the podcast, I didn't know that you'd be talking about Russell Wilson not being on the Seahawks. If you had told me that prior, I might have rethought coming on this podcast because I wasn't prepared for this slander.
I am sorry about that. Yeah, I do see the Seahawks behind you. I mean, he wanted out this year, and I don't think that it's going to be an absolute thing. I'm very bullish on the Seahawks for this year, but we saw some. Who was it? Was it The Athletic that came out with that article that he wasn't happy? So I think that maybe Shane Waldron could really change things around and make him happy there. But that was a really unexpected article to come out saying that Russell Wilson wasn't happy with his situation in Seattle. So am I saying that he will be a free agent next year? Absolutely not. But it is possible. We know Aaron Rodgers is gone. We see these veterans that are. I feel like Peyton Manning really changed the game by going to Denver, and now we see Tom Brady in Tampa. A lot of these guys, when they're unhappy with their situations, they're not just going to let it ride with the team that they've been with. They are okay changing teams late in their career. So I don't expect it to happen, but it's possible, Ian. And I know you don't want to hear that, but let's go ahead and talk about something that you probably can get a little bit excited about, and that's Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett for me is a guy that I'm trying to acquire everywhere I can. I think that he has taken over as the new Doug Baldwin. Everybody thinks that he's just this burner. And, I know that there was a lot of volatility last year. Well, there was a lot of volatility with Doug Baldwin as well. But that's what we have seen him turn into, as a polished route runner. I love Tyler Lockett. I'm trying to buy him everywhere I can. Ian, can you try to put your Seahawks bias aside and let us know what to do with Tyler Lockett in Dynasty Leagues?
Yeah. So, and that is one thing I try to do, is remove my bias, especially in fantasy, because I'd rather win my fantasy leagues than root for certain players on my team. But I do like Tyler Lockett, and I like his value. The problem with me not having any shares is there's also guys around his value like MT, Sutton, Woods, Visca, who I do like a little bit more. But one thing I wanted to cover was how the knock on Tyler Lockett is his inconsistency. So people are pulling his median points per game, which is a 44% difference from what his points per game was. And they're using that as, he's not consistent. How can you reliably put this on your team? But you can't predict volatility. So I went back and I looked at 2019. In 2019, Tyler Lockett had 14.6 points per game. His median was 13.6. That's a 6.8% difference. A lot different than his 44% difference he had this season. Then I went back to 2018. He had 13.8 points per game. Median points per game, 13.1. That's a 5% difference. So if you're basing your decision off median or inconsistency, it's probably a process that's going to end up burning you.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, 1 year is not a trend. And sure, he was inconsistent last year. DK Metcalf was a little bit inconsistent last year too. But the other thing is, inconsistency isn't necessarily a bad thing. When he hits on those weeks where he has 200 yards and 3 touchdowns, it's almost impossible to lose that week. And, obviously he's going to screw you on the down weeks. But, I'm somebody that totally tries to embrace variance when I'm building my roster. So I don't get scared away from somebody, even if they are a bit inconsistent. Drew, I have no idea what your take is on Tyler Lockett. This is a player that I haven't seen you discuss at all. So what are you doing with Lockett this year?
I don't dislike Lockett. I don't love Lockett either. I think Seattle is a very tough place to buy into right now. We don't know if they're going to pass at any kind of reasonable rate. I think they might. I got to imagine that the whole Russell Wilson didn't get traded thing was probably they gave in a little bit on, we're going to pass a little bit more than we have in the past. I think that's probably what the negotiation was around. So I kind of think we're going to see a little bit more passing, but if it's more of the same that we've seen the last 3-4 years, I think I'd rather just bet on DK Metcalf and leave Tyler Lockett on the side of the road. There's also a chance that DK Metcalf just explodes this year. That's completely possible. And if he does that, then it's probably not great news for Tyler Lockett. So I'm really indifferent on Tyler Lockett. It's probably why I've never talked about him on Twitter, is because I just don't really have a strong take either way. I think he's a quality veteran, but I think I could probably go and buy a quality veteran that's going to put up similar production for a lot less than I can get Tyler Lockett for. Like, I'd probably buy Tyler Boyd and be just as happy, and it would probably cost me a fair bit less than it would cost to get Tyler Lockett, for an example. Or like a Cooper Kupp. Like, I got to imagine he's in the same price range, and I'd much rather have a Cooper Kupp because I think he's got a lot higher ceiling. That being said, if Seattle goes out and lights everything on fire like they did at the beginning of last year, I'm going to be pretty sad I missed out on Tyler Lockett.
Yeah.
So I
don't have one of those.
Either way.
I don't think Tyler Lockett's somebody that really, like, you can't look at his analytical profile and get super excited about it. Like, he doesn't have a lot of size. You know, he's fast when he turns the jets on, but he's not strong. He's not big. He doesn't have anything that really jumps out to you from an analytical profile. But he's just one of those guys that if you've been watching him throughout his career, he is just such a hard worker, and you can see it that like every single week he's just getting better and better and better. And the biggest thing that doesn't show up anywhere analytically is that he just has the trust of Russell Wilson. And when you've got the trust of one of the most accurate passers in the NFL, that is going to pay dividends as well. So he had more targets last year than DK Metcalf did, and they gave him a $69 million extension this year. So I expect him to still be a pretty heavy part of the offense heading into the next few seasons. But, you know, like you pointed out, there's a lot of veteran wide receivers that you can get around that same price range. I just think that, you know, we've seen Tyler Lockett now finish as the wide receiver 16, wide receiver 13, and wide receiver 11 over the last 3 years. And I expect to see that for the next 2 to 3 years going forward, where he's going to be a high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1. And I think that he's going to be a little bit more consistent than people expect him to be.
So I have a question for you then. If you think that he's going to maintain that pace, are you not projecting DK Metcalf to take a step forward?
I'm expecting the team to pass a little bit more. And I think that
larger volume.
Right. And when I looked at the film, you know, what I see, I know we have very different processes here, but what I saw is that when Tyler Lockett was running his best, that's when it helped DK Metcalf out quite a bit. So DK Metcalf, as talented as he is, you know, I haven't seen much outside of just running a 9 route and running posts. So if he's able to really become a much more polished route runner, I'd like to see that. But half of his routes last year came on a 9, a post, or a slant route. And that's pretty much what he does, is he's able to just outrun and outmuscle defenders. But I don't know if he's ever going to be able to take that Calvin Johnson, you know, Julio Jones type step where he can be the number 1 alpha on a team. I think for DK Metcalf to succeed, he needs somebody like Tyler Lockett that's able to pull a little bit of the pressure off of him. Ian, I know you're a Seahawks fan, so I'd love to get your take on this.
Yeah, DK Metcalf is someone who could absolutely be the wide receiver 1 next year. I do want to point out to the limited route tree that you were talking about DK Metcalf and how that could hinder him. I do remember Michael Thomas, another alpha receiver who just dominated when he came in, just like DK Metcalf, was well known for just being a slant boy that was with Drew Brees, but that didn't stop him from finishing and being the consensus wide receiver 1 in all of formats.
Yeah,
I think Calvin Johnson had a similar road tree as DK Metcalf's as well. Actually, I remember somebody brought that up in the Patreon at one point. Why am I so low on DK Metcalf? I was like, oh, he only ran like 3 routes. And they're like, well, so did Calvin Johnson. They showed me the reception perception. I was like, oh.
And if you look at DK Metcalf's reception perception, it actually looks really good because his win rates on all of his routes are pretty high. But the difference is that he isn't running those other ones often. So when he does run a curl route, it's not that he's running it well. It's just that they are playing so far off of him, expecting him to keep going down the field, that when he does pivot and turn, you know, he's got the separation. So even if you're not that polished as a route runner, when you have the speed that you have to prepare for DK Metcalf, you know, I think that he can take a step forward. I just think that Tyler Lockett, you know, you don't commit almost $70 million to a wide receiver that you're not going to want to continue peppering with targets. So I think it's more of a 1A, 1B type situation than it's ever going to be a clear-cut wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 situation.
I'll have you know that the New York Giants just signed Kenny Galladay to a very large contract, and they're not going to pepper him with targets. He's a fake alpha.
That's a very good point. And if we're comparing DK Metcalf to Kenny Galladay here, you know, I think these are just players in completely different tiers. So I'm not even going to try to go there. But we've had this guy in the chat, Koenig52, and you know, he's been in the chat quite a bit. And I told him that I would get to this at the end. So Drew, before we sign off, I just want to ask you this question. have you guys talked about why Drew is fading Najee Harris so hard? We'll wrap up with this, Drew. Give us your spiel as to why you're fading Najee Harris.
Well, he just isn't a very good prospect. I mean, I don't know. There's just not a whole lot to like about Najee Harris, the prospect at all. Najee Harris's draft capital comes from film. There's no analytical reason to draft Najee Harris that highly in the NFL draft. That being said, once he got drafted in the first round, I had to bump him. He went from a bust tier running back to a coin flip tier running back, which is my second highest tier. And like I said earlier, there's only like 27 or 24 or something running backs in the bulletproof tier in like 20 years. So being a coin flip isn't a bad player. I need to emphasize that as much as I can. It's not that he's a bad prospect. It's not that he's a bad opportunity or a bad likelihood of hitting. It's just that prospect profile versus his dynasty ADP does not align. He is getting drafted like he's a sure thing, and I don't think he's necessarily a sure thing in the sense that, or in what I'm looking for, which is a long-term starter at the running back position, like a long-term running back one. I think he can get there based on pure volume, maybe even this year. But I also wouldn't be shocked at all if he had a James Conner type year this year. Like I don't think James Conner is a bad running back. I don't think that I can definitively say based on math that Najee Harris is a better player today than James Conner was yesterday. Yeah. If that makes sense.
I agree with that. And you know, I appreciate you kind of going off the cuff here. That wasn't a question that we had prepped for or anything, but you know, I know you're a seasoned veteran here and you can talk about just about anything at any time. So before we sign off, Drew, one more time, let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter and where they can find your Patreon.
So I'm at on Twitter at DFBeanCounter and on Patreon at patreon.com/bulletproofff, and then Bulletproof Fantasy Football Podcast and YouTube.
Awesome. And then Ian, let everyone know where they can find you. And if you've got any articles or shows or anything else that you got coming up in the near future, go ahead and plug it. The floor is yours.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at dynasty_IM. I probably have a lot of takes you disagree with, so it might be worth your follow or not worth your follow. And then I write for DFF, and I'm getting ready to release a Patreon at some point in the next couple of weeks and give access to my databases and my prospect sheets and my own rankings. So I'd plug that. So if you're interested, follow me.
Awesome. And what I'll say is continue going against the grain, Ian. We have too many people out here that are just parroting the same chalky takes. You know, you can do that if you want to, but really going against the grain is how you can differentiate yourself in this space. And that's why I wanted to have both of you on this show today, because you are not afraid to do that. And that's why I follow both of you guys. And I like the content because you will go against the grain and then you will strongly stand behind it. And you have fact and reason and data to support it. And I think that's what really, really makes this industry so much fun. So thank you guys both for taking the time today to come on this show. I will be back next week with episode 14. You can find me every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much for tuning in.